So, hello. Okay, so hello and welcome to this second session at the CGIAR FAO Rockefeller Pavilion and the first one for today. So today we're featuring research and innovation to address food security in Africa amidst climate change. Briefly, to frame this, we're reflecting on recurring global food crises, conflicts, and trade shocks, highlighting the vulnerability of Africa's food system and global food, water, and biodiversity systems. As we know, at the African continent level, almost 8 million people suffer from some form of malnutrition and lack access to sufficient food, and where the majority of acutely food insecure people live in conflict-affected areas and are highly exposed to climate extremes. So today, we want to make sure that the options we're providing are working to provide crucial, sustainable, climate resilient, and peaceful options for hunger and malnutrition through the means of research and innovation for food, land and water systems, and to ensure that there's a comprehensive approach to this technology sharing. So today, we'll be sharing some findings from CGIAR centers, and in line very much with some of the words spoken at the high-level plenary this morning, we're certainly working in the spirit of COP27 for Together for Implementation. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Mr. Ali Abu Saba, Director General of ICARDA and Regional Director of Siwana for CGIAR, to say a few words to start us off.
Thank you very much, Mary Margaret, and good afternoon, everyone. Today we have a special session that brings a number of CGIAR centers together to share many of the innovations that have been developed over the years and how together working within the context of one CGIAR model, how can we support the agenda of food security and the transformation of food, land, and water in ways we have not done before. Just to give some context, CGIAR was established 50 years ago. Many of the centers had a very different problem to deal with compared to the problem we have to deal with today. The issues then were about limited food supply, issues around hunger. And for the following 50 years, the focus has been on food production, produce more food, regardless of how much pressure this would put on the natural environment, regardless of how much water this would consume, how much fertilizer you would apply. So with the increased awareness on climate, particularly over the past 10 years, there has been increased calls on the CGIAR to reform itself, to reassess and examine the working modalities. How do we work together? We're all great centers, each one of us in their own area, whether it's a research area or a geographic area, but working individually to support countries the way we have done for the past will not be fit for the future. The kind of challenges we see under climate, and we've heard very interesting interventions by the global and world leaders this morning during the opening session. This type of challenges calls for the CGIAR to come together, work with greater synergy, greater coordination, combine the research and scientific capacity across the system. So if you take ICARDA alone, maybe 400, 500 people, if you bring in a big center like CIMID, I don't know how many thousand people, and anything in between, when you put all of these things together, then you have a scientific capacity of almost 3,500 people working together under a 10,000 staff organization. And with a common strategy, with clear definitions, clear deliverables, and systems that are intended to support the delivery of research under this model. So, now, CGIAR has luckily developed so many innovations over the past years, many of which actually falls squarely in support of the transformation under the climate change agenda. And today we're going to hear from Dr. Yusuf, who represents IMI, a number of interventions and a lot of experience around the water management from a macro level. ICARDA also has a lot of work on water, but there is a very nice complementarity between us. IMI works at the macro level and we work on farm. So that complementarity is quite helpful in the way it brings the support to countries. So, and then after that we'll hear from Dr. Michael Baum, who is the Deputy Director Research for ICARDA, as well as a number of other colleagues from CIAT, IFPRI, and WorldFish, provided that technology would allow us to do so. But if the technology does not work well, we'll have to manage with the small team that we have, and hopefully we will be able to inspire you with some of the experiences that we've gained within the CGIAR. So without further ado, I'm going to invite our first speaker, Dr. Yusuf. Please, you have the floor for the next 10-15 minutes. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. Hi everyone. So yeah, very happy to be here today. As mentioned by Mr. DG, my intervention will be around water, but at large scale. We all know the interlinkages between water resources and food security, so no need to go into that point. But I would like to start from here actually. Unfortunately, part of the graph is not clear, but you need to trust me. I will tell you. So these are the MENA region countries, and you can see that most of them are under the absolute scarcity situation, water scarcity situation, and situation is dynamic, is moving. And we expect that this will be even worse in the near future. Probably we will focus on Morocco today as a case from Africa where water scarcity is impacting the food security or let's say challenging the food security in the country. The example is coming from central Morocco in a watershed called Souss Massa. In this area, water resources are scarce, and we've been invited by the government in Morocco to take this example, this area, to implement the exercise that I will be speaking about today, which is about Water Accounting Plus. So the government put us in a very challenging area. It's challenging because it's very important. It is big, one of the biggest watersheds in Morocco, and also because of the social, economic, and also physical challenges that we've got here. In this area, 83% of the it is contributing by 83% of the national export of fruit and vegetables. We know Morocco is one of the big players in export and production of fruit and vegetables to Europe, to US, also to the Gulf, and 83% of this potential is coming just from this area, and 67% of citrus exports are grown there in this area, and it is contributing by 45% of labor, of national labor. So you can imagine how important this basin to Morocco from social, economic, and also from biophysical areas, since the groundwater table in this basin is dropping by 2 to 3 meters every year. So you can imagine how challenging is the situation of water resources, in addition to other water-related issues like seawater salinization, because of the growers are over-pumping. So we've got seawater intrusion in the coastal area. So the objective of this project of UMI, where we worked with the representative of the Ministry of Water, the local representative of Ministry of Water in Souss Massa, is to understand the current situation of water availability and use, then to understand the productivity, which is very important. Today we were in the official opening ceremony, and we heard about the importance of action, of implementation. So to do action implementation, we need to understand first to identify the gaps and also the implementation areas. So the objective here was to understand the current situation of water in this basin, which is very complicated for the reasons that I said, and also because of the importance of other sectors. In this area, we've got Agadir, one of the most touristical cities, number 2 in Morocco. So very strong touristical activity in addition to other industrial activities. So we've got both quality and quantity challenges in this area. As I said, we used our very own tool called Water Accounting Plus. Basically, it's a way to monitor, to understand water resources based on remote sensing data. It is very useful in our areas where the ground gauging is weak, which is the situation in most of the African and also MENA countries. So Water Accounting Plus is a modeling tool based on remote sensing data. So to understand the accounts of water across the watershed in even in special way, in temporal and spatial way. Quick information about the area. It's arid, semi-arid area, though the rainfall season is from October to April. It is receiving something like 250 millimeter per year. So you can imagine surface water is not that important in the water budget in this area, which explain the importance of groundwater in the agriculture activity, since farmers are over pumping even in this area. In terms of land use, which is very important components in our work, because our tool Water Accounting Plus is relying heavily on the land use and land cover to estimate the water account. Most, let's say 60%, 60% of the lands in Souss Massa Basin are barren lands, and the rest are mostly forests, in addition to obviously the very intensive growing areas, mostly in the coastal part in yellow color. In water accounting, we rely on remote sensing, and as specialists, as scientists, we know how difficult it is to estimate the evapotranspiration under greenhouses. And in this area, we have the most intensive greenhouses growing area in Morocco. So we definitely needed to understand the water balance, including under greenhouses. So our scientists innovated actually a kind of a tool, an approach to estimate the evapotranspiration under the greenhouses. We had some chance, honestly, in this basin, since we had access to decent amounts of recorded data on the ground, basically climatic data. So compared to other basins in Morocco, this basin is let's say, one of the gauged basins in Morocco. So we had some data, and this data was useful to calibrate our model. Since we are relying heavily on remote sensing, this data was important to calibrate the stream flow. And we had also access to some recorded stream flow data across the watershed to warm up and also to calibrate and validate our model. In this exercise, we even projected the water situation in the future under different scenarios, and in agreement with our partner, we agreed to project under the most pessimistic scenario, RCP 8.5, within 2030 and 2050. Here are some information about the goodness of fit after the calibration validation of the model in many stream flow gauges across the watershed. And here are some results. This might be the most important slide in my presentation today. So these are the kind of accounts, we count them accounts, that are delivered by the Water Accounting Plus tool. So storage change is basically the amount of water that is needed to be depleted from the all kind of storage in the watershed. In this watershed, we are relying on groundwater. So you can imagine how challenging and how difficult the situation of aquifers in this watershed. So 3.17 is the amount of money of water that is depleted from the storage in watershed. The exploitable water is 4.99, and the utilized one is 4.53. So you can see that most of the available water is actually used. And the utilizable outflow, I mean, out of the system, out of watershed is quite nil. And here we've got the outflow from the watershed. The thing that we need to probably mention here is very few amount of water is left from the system. So we are using most of the utilizable water. When we call it exploitable water, it means in terms of quantity, and mainly also because of quality. And I will come to this point later on. So most of the good quality water is used in this watershed. We identified also a significant quality issue in the watershed, basically due to the agricultural activity and other industrial activities in the watershed. Here is another representation of the water accounts for the Souss Massa basin. In this way, we are trying to make a relationship between all kinds of inflows and outflows depending on the utilizability of this water, and also in terms of quality. This kind of charts are generally requested by the stakeholders to make things more, let's say, more easy and user-friendly. In terms of projections in the future, 2 or 3 things probably to mention. The deficit will be something like 1.86 kilometer cubic in the wet season and 0.64. We included here all the projects that are planned by the government in this area. And believe me, a lot of the projects in Morocco are here in this area. So we've got one of the largest desalination plants in Africa, is there in Souss Massa, and big efforts in linking dams and reservoirs to decrease this, to increase the climate or the water justice across the watershed. And beside all this effort, we estimated that there will be a deficit of 1.86 cubic meter in wet season. The problem of quality will be there, and it will be even worse. We will come to that point later on. So yeah, these are the some of the efforts of the government that we've included in our analysis: interbasin transfer, wastewater reuse, and also the big dams and the desalination plant. So yeah, as a summary of this work, we had chance to have some data from the recording network in the basin. We had chance, but we haven't this chance in other regions, other watersheds. We always keep speaking about the importance of GoGen stations and GoGen networks to understand water situation, also climate, to be able to put in place actions. Remote sensing and hydrological modeling, again, is a good tool to do that, to understand, to simulate, to probably even simulate actions and strategies on the ground. Regarding the specific case of the Souss Massa basin, we demonstrated that very little water is available for allocation, since most of the water is used, as I said, water of good quality, most of it is already used. And we demonstrated also the problem of water quality. Additional 3.17 kilometer cubic meter of is needed currently under current situation, and mostly depleted from groundwater in the region to satisfy the need in terms of irrigation. Thank you very much, and I will be very happy to take your questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yusuf, for sharing that the water accounting and the measures taking place in the basin in Morocco and across to Algeria. I will hold the questions for now. Michael, I'd like to ask you to come to the podium, please, in our reorganized session. Thanks.
Good afternoon, and I'm going to talk to you about meeting the challenges of climate change for dryland food production. My colleague Vinay Nangia, who is a team leader for the soil and water and agronomy team at ICADA, he has put this together. He was supposed to be here, but he's still up in the air, so I'm happy to take stage for him. It's known that the Mediterranean region, and especially North Africa, is according to all the projections that are there, is a hotspot for climate change, and that connects nicely with what Youssef was reporting on, there might be some deficits in the water table, in the water balance for the agricultural production in this area now and in the next 20 or 30 years if these trends continue. The situation for the region is that if you see on the right hand side, we have a number of countries that completely need to import their food needs, such as countries in the Gulf. You have countries in the middle that produce between 30 and 70% of the food. If you take Egypt, for instance, as an example, that needs to import about 50% of the food needs, and depending on how the water balance in the countries is further developing, so that trend or a number of countries might have difficulties really in future to produce their needs. And yesterday we talked about the sustainable intensification. So it is really important to take this into consideration while there are options to diversify and to produce in their countries, but it's really to do it in a sustainable way, and that's why making balances, water accounting balances, is really so important to guide the identification. On the positive side, I mean, there are a number of innovations, especially coming through the digital revolution, that might help us in future to revert to address some of the problems. As you see here, there are a number of tools and technologies from in the digital tools that are employed in agriculture and agriculture production, and that can help us really to be more efficient and more precise. So this goes from extension services, satellite imaging, and drone technology, agricultural market and crop selection, then all the area of social media for the sharing of knowledge, the TV and radio channels that can be used to inform the farmers. So there's a lot of new technology outside there that, when employed, can really help us to address some of the demands of the producers as well as the consumers. One of the smart farming technology, which today you can see already in a number of countries, might be still music for the future, but with the trends that we have seen continuing, there is a continuous push for such kind of technology. I mean, smart farming technologies such as the vertical farming. A growth chamber can be created in the basement or on the roof of a house, even in the mega cities in this part of the world. So this is really, these are models is already in practice and in a small amount, but might gain more traction in future. As we have said, digital innovations can be used to monitor whole watersheds and landscape, and it can be used to zoom down on down to a tree even. With artificial intelligence, the growth of the plants can be monitored. The development of pests and diseases can be monitored. For example, in the Gulf, the red palm weevil is one big problem that a consortium under FAO and a number of organizations try to really to use digital tool to monitor the development of the pest there. Yes, and as you can see here, using the satellite and image technology, you really can have the image a large scale, and but can also zoom down to individual plants or trees in order to see the development over the growing period. Satellite imaging is a bit static because it uses information, maybe not the latest information, but drone technology is, for instance, a technology that gives real-time images of growing plants, and the correlations need to be established between these images and what's happening on the ground. That can be done today already to a certain extent, and there are quite good correlations with data that are generated on the ground and data that are being generated from the drones, and that, of course, if that can be further developed, that can be employed large scale, and that can really help to develop the agriculture in the next 10 or 20 years, and and this technology really to be used more on large scale. So, for instance, at ICADA we are developing heat and drought station in Morocco. Morocco has been mentioned as one of the hotspots for climate change, and this allows us this rainout shelter, and then is really to monitor the plant growth in these tubes with a lot of sensor technologies, spectral cameras that really can monitor the plant growth. Then mobile operations with a hyphen system that can be used in the fields, in the plots of the breeders. That also can replace the breeder's eye. Here's a lot of modern technology, like, as I said, spectral cameras that can actually tell you accurately about the health of the plant, the status of the plant, and because this kind of technology is needed, as in the past we relied very much on the plant breeder's eye to select plants, and but nowadays, I mean, the time of a person becomes a limiting factor, and that's why we use digital technologies in order to try to support this kind of decisions, and more these digital tools are being used in our day-to-day work. From the work of the plant breeders, our work is really trying to develop what we call the product profiles. Product profiles are really varieties that are adapted in the local context. The ICADA DG has mentioned that 50 years ago, the successful work of the CG was with the introduction of so-called mega varieties that really have helped to address the food security issues, especially in India and Pakistan and so on. But today we need much more country-specific and local-specific solutions. So that's why we try really to develop this product profile that develop germplasm that is really adapted to specific countries, and and this is a global effort, really to be much more specific, and because what was discovered is that in many of our countries varieties stay for too long in the field. Often we have varieties that are 20, 30, 40 years old, and that means that the genetic gain is not delivered to the farmers. So we need varieties change over much faster, every 5 to 10 years. Only then we can deliver, then the farmer can benefit from the genetic work that has been done in the last years. And that's why it's really important to provide these product profiles, country-specific for the regions. In order to gauge some of the development, I mean, also what Youssef has explained, within the MENA region there is also a network of weather stations that have been established in different countries in order to measure evapotranspiration. This is in cooperation with the FAO and other organizations. That network is being expanded and really to provide on-the-ground data and very important for modeling work. And and that is also some of the new technology being employed in order to really to address climate change and adaptation. A lot of work goes into the diversification of cropping system. In many parts, at least in northern Africa, is wheat after wheat, and with all its negative consequences on the soils, and so that's why we try to introduce other crops, and most important for the farmers is to see crop rotations that are beneficial and that are economic. So by the end of the day, the farmer is an entrepreneur that wants to make money and or to live from it. And so that's why we need to provide rotations that provide a benefit for the farmers. And here you can see that a number of alternatives have been tested, such as onion, sesame, bean, chickpeas, and quinoa. And as you can see in Morocco, the lentil onion system was maybe the most profitable one, followed by lentil and quinoa, lentil and chickpea, lentil and bean, really much lower as compared to wheat with $800 per hectare. So you can have much more incomes if you have also a market where you can sell those systems. A specific project that we are trying to develop for Egypt is really to employ, to use into the possibility of using barley in a mixture with wheat to produce the baladi bread, because as I have said before, Egypt is, in terms of the wheat production, is producing 50% of the needs, and the other 50% is imported because of the limitation of the land. But there are lands that cannot be planted with wheat, and barley is a crop that is more adapted to, for instance, to salinity, but also is more resistant to drought. And so there are areas where we try the barley production and then use barley as a mixture with wheat to produce bread. That's not new. That has been researched in Egypt. Egypt has tried wheat in combination with 10 different commodities like barley, like cassava, like sorghum, millets. So there are lots of mixtures that can be tried, and alternative sources for the production. And and we think that barley wheat is one combination that we would really like to support, because as I said, barley is a much more drought tolerant crop, and we see the potential for the future, and can be grown in marginal areas and in salt affected soil, and so that's an adoption and a program that we would like to support and roll out from now and in the future, to see what alternative products can be used in order to secure the food security in countries. In other countries in the African continents, for instance in Nigeria, they're doing the mixtures of wheat with cassava, and so that's not completely new, but I think we need to do more in this one in order to make these mixtures amenable to local contexts. And as a take-home message from Vinay's intervention is that Siwana is vulnerable to climate change, but offers unique innovations for North-South climate adaptation. Decades of agri-experience in harsh climates, heat waves and droughts have been here. Satellite observation for better land use and big data for agriculture is possible. Soil conservation and fertility, the climate-smart agronomy, renewables, land reclamation, and also desalination technology is available. And if this is packaged and ready to use innovation to mitigate climate change impacts. And thank you very much, and I'm ready to entertain any questions thereafter.
So thank you to our... So thank you very much to our three panelists. We've undergone a change again in how we'd like to structure this. So if I could invite the three of you up to the front, please. So we can ask some questions, we can dive a bit deeper into some of the statements that you made. I was wondering if there's anyone who'd like to help. So of course I'd like to invite anyone from the audience if you have any questions. But I wanted to start with the first question. We are obviously colleagues, we're in contact almost every day, sometimes by the hour. And I was wondering across the three of you, was there anything that you heard today or saw today that was new or made you think about an issue in a particularly different perspective? And then following up on that, this different perspective, how do we action it? How do we make it feasible? How do we make it usable for stakeholders in the region? How do we make it scalable across, say, the CG or for our colleagues worldwide? We don't, we do. Thanks, Danny. Yeah, I think Ali'd like to say something first, Jen.
Hello?
Yep.
Sorry. Okay. So thank you, Mary, for the question. It's a very relevant question, but I think having seen the two presentations, and of course based on my personal knowledge of the work that the CGIAR does, I don't think there is a challenge in terms of availability of technical innovations to help countries adopt and adapt to the negative impact of climate change. There is no limitation or shortages, again, in terms of technological innovations to help with the mitigation agenda. There is already a lot of work, but what is missing is the means of implementation, the funding that is needed, the coordination at the global level. And I think some of you who have been in the presidential session in the morning, there were very clear messages about the need to act together, the need to scale up the investments that are needed to help countries implement what is already known to be the absolute minimum action to be able to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions and to help countries adapt to the negative impact of climate change. So this was a key message that came out very strongly in a very big way. The second point is, and that's probably a bit outside the immediate scope of the discussion, you know, there is enormous progress over the past 50 years in terms of innovations. But some of the global challenges that we are living in today, such as the conflict that is happening at global level, has actually undone a lot of the work done on the climate agenda over the past 30, 40 years. And in fact, we are in a very high risk zone at this point in time. If this conflict prolongs, you are seeing countries going back to burning charcoal. We are seeing countries going back and looking for fossil fuels, nuclear plants being restarted and this and that. So there is a policy reversal. And I think that's a very important element to keep an eye on. And my last point here is what is needed at this point in time. I think the CGIAR has done what it needs to do in terms of structuring itself in ways to make it possible for a coordinated action among the different scientific groups. What is needed now is the same level of coordination at country level, so that when you have national programs being designed at large scale, you're not dealing with 5, 6 different ministries, because the transaction cost can be very high. And we have His Excellency former Minister of Agriculture, Minister Ibrahim al-Dukhari, who has been, you know, in this space, and he's actually working with almost 22 African ministers and Arab ministers, and I'm sure he's dealing with those issues day to day and those kind of challenges. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Alec. I think.
Yeah, for me, thank you for the question.
Yeah,
really interesting question. I will take it from the very last word of Mr. DG. I was very happy to hear science today in the high level session. Most of the speakers, they mentioned science and the role of scientists in helping the adaptation, also the mitigation efforts. I will come to this point later on, but the thing that probably that's amazed me the most is we focused in Africa today in the high level session, and also in our session today. We have Morocco, Egypt as examples from Africa. Africa is vulnerable, is a victim of climate change impact. But we heard today, and this amazed me, we heard that solutions can come from Africa also. So yes, we are vulnerable. Africa is receiving most of the loss and damage, but no, most of the solution also can come from Africa. We heard the example of renewables. So we are a very rich continent in terms of resources that can be exploited. We have some of the largest solar farms are in Africa, in Kenya and Morocco. We have also wind energy. In terms of adaptation, I like the very last slide of my colleague Michael and Vinay, where they mentioned that the South can teach also the North. We can have some solutions coming from the South to the North. And we all in our regions in Africa where, for example, farmers have used to implement some specific actions and practices to make them get small crops more resilient to impact of climate change, to extremes, etc. And also we know about some, for example, ancient, very old practices to manage water in Sudan, in Egypt, in many parts of Africa, also in Sahel. So as scientists, and here I come to the point of scientists, we, I know that our colleagues in the CGIAR are doing that. Icarda, they mentioned that they are learning from the farmers. They are very close to the farmers. We do the same with the farmers also to understand how they manage water, including in the very ancient, under the very ancient and old way of managing water, because we can learn a lot since these practices and ways of managing, for example, crops and water has survived all this impact of time and also of climate. It means that there is potential there. So I will stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Michael, go ahead if you'd like to respond.
Yeah, I think, yeah, also to follow what Youssef said. I mean, to me, if you, we have unfortunately too many countries that went from thriving drylands to really to fragility in this part of the world. And if you see, for instance, you know, Syria. There are even some reports that really link, you know, the climate change with the social conflict or the war, the internal war, and right or wrong, but I think we will see that in a number of countries that you know, with the temperature extremes and this potential is there, that you know, when countries cannot produce enough food and then certain parts of the population will suffer, and so that's why I think very important is also learning from the south and or within the countries is the regional cooperation. I think there's much to learn, and to so to speak, to mitigate also climate effects. So if I see, for instance, along the Nile, I hope I don't step here on any sensitive issues, but potentially there's a lot of water. Sudan, for instance, is a country with land and water, and that potentially could produce food for neighboring countries. Sudan was on a good path to reach self-sufficiency in wheat production, and now it's gone far away from it. But these are kind of efforts I think that we need to support. And Egypt is in need of wheat. Sudan can produce more, so Egypt and Sudan can work together, and in order to address some of these problems. Ethiopia, to stay in the Nile Valley, potentially will reach self-sufficiency in wheat production this year or next year, is another candidate that potentially can produce more and provide food to countries that do not produce it sufficiently. So intercontinental trade, I think, is something that we should think about. And my belief is also, if nations are trading partners, there is potentially also less, less probability to end into conflict.
Ali, you had a response? No? Any questions from the floor? Please, our colleagues at AOAD. Do you want, sorry, can we get the microphone? Sorry.
Thank you very much for the very interesting presentations and for this information about the innovations from CGIAR. My first question, going back to the point of the from field or from farmers practices and how we can learn, or south-south learning or exchange the experiences. are there any documentation or mapping for the good practices for these small indigenous practices for farmers that we can learn from? And have you assessed these practices that we can mainstream as intergovernmental organization at AOD with the scientific basis for documentation? What role can AOD as an intergovernmental organization play through our as a regional platform for mainstreaming these innovations to countries to be adopted, as Mr. Ali Abu Saba mentioned, on national level? Thank you.
Go ahead. Yep, go
Do you
ahead.
want to proceed
I think best if you ask. Yeah, we'll take a few
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks so much for these very interesting presentations. I really liked it. My question is for Michael. Michael, in one of your presentations, one of your slides, you mentioned the margin profits for different cropping pattern, and this is gross. My interest is to know how much does cost the new interventions that you did over. So my comparison is going to with and without. So I can have some sort of feeling of the cost of these interventions that you get. Thank you so much.
Any other?
Thank you very much. From what I've heard, that technically, the technical interventions that are about to be released or are in the making, or those which are ready, are really capable of making a huge change on the ground. But usually when we talk of interventions, we talk of technical and institutional interventions. And for that matter, the issue of science policy interface. So as a reflection, how do you see, the bigger gain that we would really make in terms of, because even the technical interventions that we have at the moment, if for whatever reason we manage to put them on the ground and implement them, there is a huge gain that we can really secure. But it's all about the engagement, which is the institutional arrangement that we need to do. So how do you see the reflection, and maybe coming together today, as you said this morning, everybody's talking about we want to implement together, we want to go together. And there is a huge part of this, tackling the environment in which you are working. So if there is a reflection on that one, because that I see very, very critical. Now, all kinds of smart technologies are there, good interventions that produce high productivity are all there. But we couldn't get them on the ground right now. So any reflection on that would be really good.
Thank you, Dr. Daheli. Sure. Michael, if you'd like to respond to the previous questions, I think Ali would like to take the last one from His Excellency. So go ahead, Michael.
Yeah. As you know, in the CG, we have started a new reform under one CG, and there are 32 new initiatives that started this year. And all these initiatives, they have, this was part of the design, they have looked at a number of innovations for their specific discipline that can be potentially outscaled. So for each initiative, there are about 10 innovations that I'm just saying, some have 5, some have 20, but so at least 10 innovations that each initiative have looked at that can potentially be outscaled. So if you take the 32 initiatives, so you have already like 300 innovations that potentially can be outscaled. That is related to Nishreen's questions about the catalog. So if you look, you can ask each of the initiatives. So there's a catalog of innovations already available. Of course, if you take them one by one, you know, I always say it's important to test them in a context, because you know, some innovations might have a positive effect. I mean, all of the innovations have a positive effect, but if you look at them together, some might be positive, some might be negative, and maybe in the end, you know, if you introduce 2 or 3 innovations, you might not see any positive effect. So that's why it's important that you need to test those ones combined in order to see that that you can improve the systems. So that's why a systems approach and systems thinking is so important. Not looking at one individual innovations, you know, that might change the whole picture. In response to your question is this study has been done in Morocco, so I would not look at the absolute figures, but the relative figures. So if you see that in relation to the wheat in Morocco gives you $900, roughly speaking. So, but if you introduce onions or quinoa, so you have $10,000 per hectare. So that's 10 times more. As I said, because every country might have a different context, and so, but it gives you a relation that if you have a high value crop, and if you have a market for this, then some of these rotations are much more beneficial than planting wheat after wheat.
Thank you, Michael.
Okay. On the last question from His Excellency Brahim Dukheri, there are 2 great examples that I always like to cite. In the case of the United Arab Emirates, where the government decided to put climate change, water and agriculture under one minister. So that minister has been able to put in the necessary systems in place to foster all the internal synergies across those various interventions under one ministry. So there is no potential for conflict. Very similarly in Morocco, His Excellency, and we were discussing with him last month, 3-4 weeks ago in Morocco, and his, you know, a great vision, and it all cuts across the agriculture sector, the seed sector, the water sector, the policy interventions, the question of subsidies, the questions of market, the questions of seeds. So when you have those kind of institutional systems in place, then the ability to take on innovations and implement them at scale becomes feasible. And I think that is also one great example where the CGIAR, when you have one interlocutor, where you can basically work with on fisheries, on policy, on water, on seed systems, on diversification, on crop, on, you know, digitalization, it becomes far more effective when you have within something that echoes the CGIAR under one CG concept that is mirrored at the country level. So that's basically, I fully agree with you, and we hope that gradually more countries will follow the track of these 2 leading countries. I'm sure there must be others, but I don't want to be, I'm just mentioning these 2 as an example, and I'm sure there must be others who are following the same steps. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Mary.
Ali. Thank you.
One
Yusuf,
more,
as
one
a final
more,
comment.
yeah, one more word. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, regarding the policy perspective, and in addition to what said by the DG, for us the policy setting is necessary to enable those solutions that we mentioned today, and we are working on. And sometimes the policies, they are targeting a good objective with a good will, but sometimes they have side effects, let's say, or drawbacks. And we have a lot of examples, like, for example, the policies on incentives and how they can damage the aquifers, for example, since the farmers are rushing into the equipments to establish or to set the drip irrigation, etc., etc. The other example that we've got mainly from the region, since I'm speaking about the MENA region, is the coherence between policies. And probably this is touching the example of the DG. And we have actually an initiative, part of the One CG movement. We have an initiative just on that, where we are looking at the coherence of all policies around food and water and how they they complement each other, and also where are the gaps in terms of coherence to address the objectives and the challenges set for these policies. And just as example, and like the other centers of CG, just to showcase how important the policy perspective. In the MENA office currently of EMI, we have an open position just for that, policy scientists. So we are looking for a policy scientist. It's a call for all colleagues who knows a good profile to join us. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Just want to check. Ooh, question in the back. One last question before we tie this up. Thank you for your responses, panelists.
Thank you for the interesting presentation. Just one question with regard to adaptation of the interventions. Whenever there's technology interventions, what kind of upskilling of the local skills? Because I think when it comes to implementation, there's always some failure at the when it comes to interventions, there's always some failure at the implementation level because of the lack of skills of the local people, or behavioral adaptation, or the need of so what kind of policies or any ideas around it to improve upscaling in terms of these new technologies?
Thank you. Who would like to take that question?
I can start, then I can start, and I will get to Michael. Yeah, very very good question, honestly. Yeah, one of the things that we are trying to do as CG Group, as CGIAR, is to first understand and also reflect on the needs of the end users. So we need to work with them. We are working with them. We need to design and develop solutions for them based on their expectations and need. The second thing is to involve them across the process. So in this way, we will optimize the buy-in and their involvement, and also the delivery of the solution at the end. As mentioned by my colleague, we've got 32 initiatives as a new way of doing projects within CGIAR. And across all these initiatives, which are basically a big project, let's say, regional, international project, we have the upscaling as components there, actually. We have upscaling as part in all these initiatives. And we are looking at we are actually thinking about the upscaling from the beginning to optimize all chances of upscaling at the end of the project. So probably my colleague can complement.
Yeah, I don't think we can make a general conclusion. We need to look at the innovation one by one, because there might be barriers to adoption, and that's different from one innovation to another one. So that's why I think also the initiatives, they have a scaling framework where they look at first at the light track and the medium track for scaling out an innovation, and then of course that goes far beyond an initial initiative that needs national supported by a national policy framework. And let's take, for instance, conservation agriculture in Morocco. That's a technology that so far is not very much used in the drylands. It's very successful in South Asia, in South America. It's used in Australia, in North America, but in Africa, it's very little use, and that's because of the with conservation agriculture, you need to leave some of the stubble in the fields, and that's usually used for animal feeding. So in the smallholder farming, so farmers do not like, to leave some straw in the field because they could use it to feed the animals. There's anyway not enough food for the animals, and so that's why the technology is not flying in Africa. And but for instance, in Morocco, with our partner institute, with INRA, ICADA and INRA, have studied this for the last 10 or 20 years. So the technological options in terms of the machinery, then also what government support needs to be there to import the technology. So now the Ministry of Agriculture has taken it up as a priority, in 2021, and till 2030, they would like to move from 30,000 hectares to 1 million hectares under conservation agriculture in Morocco, and providing also the incentives for the farmers to buy this machinery and to use the technology to really to implement it large scale. So as I said, so it's case by case, you know, I mean, and it really need to be studied, and then really it needs the support by the country and the policy, so that that the technology can be outscaled, and then the country or somebody else need to invest in it.
Okay. So I'd like to thank our panelists. I'd like to thank everyone here. I also want to just note that this conversation can be continued online, and we'll have all of the panelists and all of their presentations that we missed. And I think some of the key things that you've brought forward and you've teased out of my colleagues here is that, in fact, Africa has its solutions. It's through effective coordination, collaboration, as well as testing opportunities for systems and adaptation that will take it forward. So again, I'd like to thank you, and good luck with COP27.
Thanks to
very
you.
much. Thanks.
Great.